the Farmland Exchange, the official podcast of CLHbid.com. Expert insights on buying and selling farmland in Western Canada.
Welcome back to the Farmland Exchange, the official podcast of CLHbid.com, where we provide you with expert insights into the process of buying and selling farmland here in Western Canada. I'm Devin Davidson, your host and digital media strategist for CLHbid.com. If you haven't already, please take a minute to like, rate, and review the podcast on your preferred platform. It really helps us out, and we greatly appreciate it. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about listing price in uncertain markets. One of the most common questions farmland owners ask is simple: what should we list our farmland for? And here to help me with that conversation, CEO of CLHbid.com, Roy Carter. Roy,
Hi,
thanks
Devin.
for being here.
Thanks.
And also our COO, Ryan Lang. Ryan, how are you?
You know what? Happy to be here with the team.
Well, we're happy to have you here. I guess, to start the conversation, Roy, just for some context, maybe we should talk about what is a listing price when selling farmland.
Totally. So a list price is really an ask by the vendor or the vendor's broker. So it'd be similar. You see in the stock exchange, there's an ask and a bid. It's an ask, so it's a price they put out there. And it could be, put out there by a vendor if it's a private sale. Or, probably most often we see a list is a real estate listing. And it's, posted in conjunction with the realtor. And it's normally a price that if somebody makes an offer at, it triggers commission. Not necessarily is the vendor obligated to sign the offer, but he would be obligated to pay commission if he didn't accept it. But again, it's just an ask price. In most cases, when it comes to farmland, pretty close to a guess in our mind, but that's what it is in a nutshell.
So just to dive a little deeper, how do we arrive at that price? Is it appraisals? Is it past sales? What typically goes into that listing price?
I think a lot of it is looking in the rearview mirror, much like appraisals do. It's like Roy said, it's a best guess, and you're hoping to, get it right. If you get it wrong, either, on the high side, you're going to sit and wait for the signs to rot off your post there. And then, the other side of that is you get it wrong low. Well, how much money are you potentially leaving on the table, right?
Yeah.
Totally. I think it's much harder to arrive at than urban real estate, where there's sort of a liquid market and generic products. Mm-hmm. Urban real estate, it would be closer to selling a combine or a pickup than, farmland and urban real estate. There's nothing in common there. There's nothing generic about it really. The most generic would be kind of open quarters, but often you've got a variety of quarters, you've got farmsteads, etc. So, unless the only way appraisals work is if there's a true comparable and it was true price discovery, often they're over the kitchen table or whatever. So it's much, much harder on farmland, and why, buyers tend to probably trust it a lot less. In town, you can get a pretty good idea. That duplex sold for this. It's listed similar. You look at 10 of them listed. Often there's multiple listings, right? In an RM or a county, there might be 2 listed and they're totally different, right?
Well, I was going to ask, does the frequency play a part in that, right? Obviously, you've got a lot more data to work with in a rural or an urban setting or in a resale market for used equipment, for example. Right? You've just got more data to work with in a thin market where you've only got, like you said, 2 in one county that might sell. Is that true reflection of the value of that land?
Yeah, it sounds like you took a stats class in university there.
To one or two of them. Yeah, I actually really enjoy statistics.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And there's a whole bunch of problems with lists in farmland. It's a guess, but then also, when it's a realtor, how did that come about? Is it high to get the listing? Was he honest with the owner, or was he trying to get a listing and then play the game about, the market's softened, you got to accept this? Right. So there's certainly people out there that assume it's overlisted to start with. So it depends upon how that come about. Generally, the realtor will suggest it, but the owner's got the stroke in the end, and the realtor's afraid of losing a listing. So they might suggest, but if the owner says, no, we're going to list at this number, I would say it gets listed at that number.
Well, I was just going to say it's got to be problematic, Ryan, that the seller has so much influence on the final selling price. And how conversely, when we approach that at CLHbid, how is that process a little bit different?
Yeah, I mean, like when it comes to CLHbid, obviously we're an online escalating tender, right? We provide a starting bid, which acts as a floor, and then the market knows better than anybody, and who's to say where that's going to go, right? So really, we have the tools to provide sellers, access to price discovery. Obviously, having a platform that's integral and transparent, in conjunction, with world-class marketing. At the end of the day, the sky's the limit, and why cap yourself in advance as with a list, right?
Yeah. No, you're dead right, Ryan. Going back to you, Devin, a bit, probably the last person that you should trust to advise you on the price of that land is the guy that owns it.
Sure.
It's kind of like asking the Boston Strangler to straighten your tie. It's probably not a good idea. So, from that point of view, that's really what's happening. It's a one-on-one. There's no other players.
Yeah.
And here you are listening to the guy that holds the asset, and you're supposed to believe what he tells you.
I like that, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to use that one. Well, is it fair to say that's maybe where the similarities end, is that the sellers are always going to have an emotional tie to whatever it is they're selling, whether it's a house in town or a piece of farmland?
Yeah, there's always going to be that emotional tie, whether it's a home, your favorite tractor, for example. My dad still, he has the Ford TW10. I don't know if he'll ever let go of that, and the same can be said about, farmland. At the end of the day, everyone at the CLH team comes from a farming background, so we get it when time comes to sell your land and eventually, move on to bigger and brighter things. It's tough, and we feel that just as much as our sellers do, right?
Yeah, totally. I would say, farmers tend to be probably more reasonable on listing, or fairly reasonable. Most of them are. We get a lot of them saying, "I don't want more than my land's worth." Right. You probably wouldn't get that from many people in town. Mm-hmm. It would get me what you can get, and if you can shaft that person, I'll take it. But most farmers are, give me what it's worth. But having said that, they're farming and they're busy. They might know rate of gain with their, beef and all that. But most of them will say, "I don't know what my land's worth," if you ask them, which is the right answer, right?
Right. Does list become even more problematic with tighter margins and softening prices?
I think so. You're just adding, more uncertainty, from the moment you're trying to decide, where should we list this at? Where are we going to place our dart with regards to list? Having all those additional factors, I think, really weigh on you. Your realtor or you, the seller. You want to get it right at the end of the day. So, what's happening in the world, all the noise, that's definitely going to impact your list price at the end of the day.
I always, it's nice to know the direction even. I always kind of compare it to the wind. You can't really see it, but, if you're doing certain things, you better figure out where it's coming from, or it's going to help you. And I always remember seeing on the side of a boat, a sailboat, you can't control the wind, but you can adjust your sails.
Sure.
There's a lot to be said for that. And, I've kind of flown all my life until recently. And I'm saying my age here now, but when I started, there was no GPS, no DME, no Lowrance. You didn't know if you had a headwind or tailwind. And it was quite a different game. And that's similar to, List right now. List hasn't changed in 100 years, but yet there is tools out there to make it better.
Right.
When I was flying in 85, going into Dallas-Fort Worth, which is the biggest airport in the world, size-wise, there was a Lockheed L-1011 going in there, Delta, and on approach, and fully loaded, and hit wind shear. And it was microblasts, and they were coming in at about 150 knots, stalls at 120. They had about 25 knots on the nose, and it switched to the tail. So all of a sudden, you got a 50-knot change. That plane then is going 100. It stalls 120. It hits the ground.
Yeah.
128 killed. That doesn't happen anymore because there's tools out there to give it information. There's radar that'll give you microblast information.
Yeah.
And we see ourselves as the better radar. We can give you information on whether you got a tailwind, headwind, what's going on. And to your point, is it more important when you don't know where the wind's coming from or it's maybe backing up? Of course.
Yeah.
Lots of people say we've had 27 years of tailwind. 2,000% increase in land prices.
Yeah.
But some are starting to feel it die, and some, recently there's a realtor in Saskatchewan that likes to go on social media, and he's saying, he's, licked his finger and stuck it out, and there's a 30% decrease in land prices. Well, who's going to believe that? But, with that information, can it hurt sellers? Of course.
Sure.
But we only act for sellers. That's crazy from a seller's point of view to be telling people that, unless you really believe it. We don't see that at all.
Yeah.
Sorry about the long story, but we think if there's better tools out there, use them, and maybe you don't hit the ground, right?
Well, there's two things I want to follow up on there. And the first one is, you sort of alluded to it, but farmers tend to think more long-term, right? So just because there's a 30% decrease, apparently, in the past year, does that mean that anyone's going to be selling farmland based on that? They're probably going to wait for that price to come back up, right? They kind of get anchored to the top price is what psychology would tell you, right?
Yeah, I've always said and been on the mindset, time in market is better than trying to time the market. With regards to farmers and farming, like you said, farmers do have that outlook that, I'm going to hold this for the next 30, 50 years, maybe even 100 years, depending on what their succession plans look like.
Yeah.
Do they have kids that are coming up, moving into farming and things like that? So, a lot of these short-term factors that come into play, that's, different things going on in the world.
Yeah.
I think farmers are really good at putting that aside, to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And, at the end of the day, if there's value there and they see that, they'll continue to buy.
I agree with you there, Ryan. We don't think for a second there's a 30% pullback. And the market doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
If you follow FCC numbers, it was up 7 the year before. It's not back 30 now. There's maybe, a change, all right. But sailors, they prefer a headwind than no wind. So from that point of view, I think you get different sellers. We get a lot of baby boomers that got it inherited. If they feel there's a bit of a change in the wind and maybe this wind is died off, they tend to be, let's unload. We can buy a cottage.
Sure.
Carney's going to change tax. The old, true, solid farmer, he's the guy that didn't sell at canola at 22 and he didn't sell at 18, but he might sell at 12. He always thinks it's coming back. So, I don't think it's happening, but if this market's backing up, the real true farmer might ride it down.
Yeah.
There's some people say the ride up is the stairs, the ride down is the elevator with land.
Right.
And the reason for that, on the way up, there's so many factors that kind of restrict its movement. And we know over the last 10 years, we've went into markets and moved it by, 70, 100% in one sale. But generally that never happens with the listing because listings are based upon rearview mirror. Mm-hmm. So it's based upon what it sold for before. So inherently there's a drag. And there tends to be a lot of over-the-counter, over-the-kitchen table deals. Mm-hmm. And people are not greedy. It's kind of like all I want from my land is what Joe got last year or the year before. Yeah. So there's quite a drag there on the way up. So maybe 27 years up. I'm not being a pessimist, but it might be a bit of an elevator ride down if it is there.
Sure.
And who might be in it? The real solid old farmers that stand in there. Maybe I don't know, but yeah.
Sorry, Devin. I'd say another thing, that CLHbid is good at is breaking down psychological barriers too.
Right.
You take Saskatchewan, for example, where a lot of guys use, multiples of SAMA to determine value. Well, I know we've sold some land, over the last 10 years here where we've come into a region, say land selling at 1.5 times SAMA. And it's not uncommon for us to come in and, maybe we move that bar to 2 times SAMA where everyone's like, well, that doesn't seem reasonable, but with price discovery and once value's there on our platform, I mean, guys will continue to bid and sometimes those things are achievable, right? And we can break those barriers down.
Well, that's a really good segue into a couple of things I wanted to ask about. So one is going back to your point, Roy, about the radar and having the tools to sort of detect the wind and where it's going. In an uncertain market, how important is it that we have a tool like price discovery on the CLHbid platform to show that you're only one bid behind that person or one bid ahead, right? Like the farmers see the value there. They know that what they're bidding is what it's worth because they're only one bid ahead of the person behind them. Does that make sense? Like in an uncertain market, how important is that?
I think it's huge personally. I mean, if buyers don't have that confidence there, I mean, they'll never buy said parcel on our platform. I mean, pricing is 100% transparent. Yeah. And as I mentioned earlier, we do have that starting bid. And as soon as someone places that first bid, it just reaffirms to everyone else that value is there and they'll continue to bid.
Yeah,
totally, Ryan. They want something external. And this is kind of, if you talk to ophthalmologists, there's, medical studies that we're all afraid of the dark to a certain extent.
Right.
And what happens is if you give less data to the brain, it starts acting up and it doesn't like it.
Yeah.
And so that's really, less data is not good. And, I kind of compare these people that don't know the market, and you got murky waters, or especially if it's backing up. You can go to, say, Cal Lake in the Okanagan, and you could be there, standing and on the rock face, and if the water is crystal clear and you can see the bottom and you're all by yourself or with your family, you probably tell them to jump. You got enough information that nobody's going to get hurt. But you go to Skaha Lake and it's been windy and you look down and it's murky, and then add a sign that's fallen over, and the sign says 20 feet deep and it's fallen over. There's a newer sign that's fallen over and it says 15 feet deep. And then there's a sign that says 10 feet now and it says jump. And you can't see anything. You're probably not going to do it. You want more information, right? And that's the whole deal. So then from a regional point of view, you can kind of call out to the guy up on the hill, say, is it safe to jump? Well, that guy might be watching or wanting to enjoying the splatters, right? So be careful on where you get it from. But if you go regional and get a group on there and they'll start, oh yeah, the water was here, I jumped last year. Once they start jumping, everybody starts jumping. Right. And you know why they jump? Not because they've tested the water. They jump because the other guy jumped.
Right.
And that's CLHbid. Once the bids come in, they bid because somebody else gives them affirmation it's okay.
Yeah.
They don't need to go down and measure the bottom of that. The best affirmation is somebody else jumping, right?
So is that one of the single best benefits of the platform, is that you're provided with real-time data on the value of something that you want, as opposed to the price of something last year that could be a little bit different, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of our benefits. Obviously, our big benefit we see is we're a law firm and we provide multi-layers of advice, whether it be tax, contract, all that. But without price discovery, you're back to the old school listing or tender, which is the guy standing by himself on the rock cliff over murky water.
Yeah.
And that's not a fun deal. So yeah, we definitely, when you put all our layers together without the world-class marketing and price discovery, that's what really brings it all together.
I wanted to go back to your point about the realtor and the drop in prices. Has CLH seen anything like that across Western Canada? What are we seeing right now through the first part of 2026?
Well, we can speak to, what we've sold here through Q1.
Sure.
In my opinion, Roy would probably agree, prices have been strong still. Even on some of the marginal land that we've sold here recently, Guys still have confidence that value is there. They show up on sale day, whether that's our marketing, our platform, or a combination of both. I mean, we're still bringing people to the table, and the market's figuring out, where that value lies. And from what we can see, I wouldn't say there's been any hesitancy yet in some of our sales.
No, I agree, Ryan. It's similar to what you said, Devin. These guys are long-term, solid buyers, and they're buying for their kids, their grandkids. They're doing equity takeout. Over 50% don't put any cash in. It's based upon their big lift. So yeah, it's maybe averaging down, whatever. But they're not easily spooked. They're solid. It's big business nowadays.
Yeah.
And the businessmen or the investors in farmland, which is not to the degree that it's kind of made out to be, that Western Canada is being bought up by investors.
Yep.
There is some there. They of course don't know CLI and productivity and that. That's why they're not jumping if they're the only one on the cliff.
Right.
They want price discovery, and they assume everybody else, when they jump, they're locals, they know it. And, that's why those investors are in there too. And they'll tell you that they won't buy on an appraisal or they won't buy on a list because there's no reason to trust it, right?
I was going to ask you about that because it's something that it came up at crop production again. It comes up at most trade shows. Is that that idea that all the farmland's being bought up by investors, like a Manette or like a Bill Gates, or so? Maybe you guys could speak a little bit to, is it just neighbors? Because that was my impression too. Is a lot of it's local buyers.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you what I've heard, and I do field a lot of call from potential interested sellers, and one of their questions is that is it China? Everyone thinks it's the Chinese that's buying land and driving the price of land up.
Yeah.
But in a lot of cases, no, it's not. Obviously, there's foreign ownership rules through Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta. BC is a little bit different, of course. But if we had to generalize, really, it's the bigger farmers that continue to drive price. They're always looking to expand and take on more acreage, and and a lot of times they have the equity to do so. So I mean, that's where I think a lot of this increase in value is being driven from.
Oh, totally. And the big solid players, they're not showy. They're not on the front page of the Western Producer or whatever. They're real, right? They don't have an office on 8th Street in Saskatoon or whatever. Yeah. Their office is in the shop. They're the real deal, right?
Does price discovery work better with a larger market base, or can it work just as well in a small regional market?
No, I mean, price discovery works regardless of the size of the market. As long as you can bring those interested parties, to the table, which we obviously do through our aggressive marketing campaigns that we do. Yeah. I mean, the key is having people there, right? As long as you have people there, they'll drive price discovery and they'll figure out at the end of the day where value lies.
Totally. I think getting out of regional and being across Western Canada certainly helps, because you bring in the borders are gone now. I was talking to a guy yesterday. He's looking at selling land at Pinoka to buy cattle land in Saskatchewan, where you can buy 5-to-1 quarters, right? 5 there for everyone there. So you need to get out of the province. They used to be, it'd be kind of in your RM or your newspaper.
Right.
I agree with Ryan. It works in any scale, but I think if you go out, it's a game changer. Yeah. Where you start getting these people, they don't see borders anymore. And even at these cattle prices, they just move cattle. They don't care if they're crossing the border or crossing 2 borders. Right. If they got to move 700 miles and take the liners, they'll go. Yeah. So that means getting it out there. Yeah, totally.
And that's where marketing and reach, is very important, I think, with regards to any sale.
Well, and I think that's what separates us from a lot of regional realtors or local realtors, other law firms, if they're doing tender or something like that. We're really, it's the reach and the frequency that our team can provide here.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Devin.
Okay, so with land, there's a lot of unique factors that can affect its value, but there's also a lot of external factors, Roy. So things like if it's a larger assemblage, the neighbors, the demographic of the neighbors in the area, how productive that land has been within the last couple of years. For these external factors, is that harder to guess in advance when a market is uncertain? Like, do you have less certainty around those things?
Yeah, that's a good question. They're really hard to ascertain, and there's nobody smarter than the market.
Of course.
But there's so many, that's the problem with appraisals on farmland. They don't take into account all the external factors that may well be a bigger factor than the quality of that land, about who's on the buy around there, who's expanding, past crops, even the economy. If the oil patch is hot in an area in Saskatchewan, it'll affect the land prices, farmland. These guys can go work off farm and, buy an extra quarter. So there's no way to bring those in. My hunch is if the wind's pulling back, the lift for all those external things is probably less too. So it's even more important to have the right radar on it to pick up the microblast, right?
Yeah.
I think in a soft market or a hot market, you never know how those external variables are going to impact a sale. Right. And I mean, that's where list and appraisals often get it wrong, right?
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
Just because of the value that the neighbor may place on that land, right? That's something you just can't calculate with an appraisal.
Exactly. Yeah.
And good point there, Ryan. Like, tender to a lawyer is no better than list. It again is, it's not an ask, it's a bid. But it's a wild guess, and again, these guys cannot stand if they had to go to the A&W in Yorkton and be made fun of that they bid too much. So they all go home and don't sleep and shave 50,000 or 100 off their bid, and again, it's there's a lot goes into it, but there's no science. So yeah, it's like 100 years ago again, and there's better stuff out there. There's new equipment and devices out there to get it right?
Yeah, for sure. Farmers tend to be positive, and they would tell you from experience that every storm runs out of rain, right? But how does that affect their mentality when the market starts backing up?
Farmers are always optimistic. What I would say is they probably approach things a lot more cautiously. With regards to buying, they're probably going to talk more with their neighbors and try to get a sense or a feel. But at the same token, if land's being sold on our site, I mean, with, like Roy mentioned earlier, with that price affirmation being there and on display, I mean, that really can resonate with a lot of people. It confirms even in a soft market or a down market, it's like, okay, that value's there. You know what, I'll continue to bid, say, for example, or, I'll engage and be interested. I'll go get financing, things like that. So,
I think it'll vary between whether you're a Gen Z, millennial, or whatever.
Sure.
These young farmers, they don't know that prices can back up, right? It's just like it's up every day. It's good. Life's good. Whereas, the older guys through the 80s, everybody pretty much worried about losing their house. 25% interest. So they're much more hardy at a pullback, and they know the sun comes up. The younger guys that have loaded up debt might have a little more sleepless nights and wonder, they've never seen this before, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I think the more older farmers, they've had some rockier roads.
Okay. I think that's all we have for today, guys. Anything else you want to cover before we...
No, just at the end, hopefully we don't work for a funeral home here. I mean, we don't see what some realtors are suggesting.
Yeah.
And we, sometimes, their problem is they work for buyers too half the time, right? So,
yeah.
what I mean? There's lots of good realtors, but they can talk one day for the seller and one day for the buyer. And, we only act for the seller. We see, use price discovery, use proper marketing, get it right. And there's lots of buyers out there, and there's lots of dry powder for your land, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, guys, we'll wrap it up.
Thanks, Steve.
All right.
Thanks for being here, guys.
Thanks very much.
That's going to do it for another edition of the Farmland Exchange. Thanks for tuning in. We really do appreciate the support. If you haven't already, please take a minute to go and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform of choice. Really helps us out, as I had mentioned at the top of the show. If there's any topics you'd like us to cover, or if you are yourself interested in selling farmland and want to have that discussion with us, send us an email at info@clhbid.com or give us a call at 866-263-7480. That's going to do it for now. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this was a positive exchange for you. Take care.